I am a Hunkpapa, and as I mentioned earlier, I was 14 years old at that time. It was past midday, and I was eating my first meal of the day, as I had been sleeping earlier. While I was eating, I heard a voice calling out, "The warriors are approaching." I quickly stood up and ran toward our horses, which were grazing near the camp. I managed to catch one with my rope, causing the rest to scatter. However, my older brother had already secured his horse and was able to redirect the others. Once I mounted my horse with the rope tied around its nose, I could see that gunfire had already started. People were fleeing, and men and boys were rushing to catch their frightened horses amid the noise of shouting and shooting. I noticed small children running from the river where they had been swimming, while all the women and children hurried down the valley. Our horses bolted toward the Minneconjous, but we managed to gather them up again and bring them back. By this time, warriors were heading toward the soldiers and mounting their ponies. Many of the Hunkpapas were assembling in the thickets and trees near the spot where the soldiers had halted and dismounted. I rode past an elderly man who was calling out, "Boys, be brave. Would you let these young ones be taken from us like stray dogs?" I hurried into our teepee and dressed for battle as quickly as I could. The sound of bullets whizzing outside made my hands tremble, so it took longer than usual to weave an eagle feather into my hair. At the same time, I had to keep a firm hold on my pony's rope as he kept pulling and trying to break free. While I was occupied with this, groups of warriors on horseback surged past me, heading upstream and shouting, "Hoka hey!" After that, I spread red paint across my face, picked up my bow and arrows, and mounted my horse. I did not possess a gun, only the bow and arrows. Once I was on my horse, it appeared that the battle upstream had ended, as everyone was beginning to return downstream shouting, "It's a good day to die." Soldiers were approaching from the opposite end of the village, and no one knew how many were advancing from that direction. A man named Little Bear approached me on a pinto horse, and he had a beautifully decorated saddle blanket. He said, "Be brave, boy. The earth is what endures." With that, I quickly rode alongside him and the others down the river, and many of us Hunkpapas gathered on the eastern side at the base of a ravine that led up the hill to where the second group of soldiers was stationed. Among us was a particularly courageous Shiloh, or Cheyenne, and I overheard someone remark, "He is going." I turned to see that it was indeed this Shiloh. He wore a distinctive war bonnet with spots and a similarly patterned robe made from the hide of some animal, secured with a spotted belt. He started up the hill alone, and we all followed him part way. Soldiers were positioned along the ridge above, standing on foot and holding their horses. The Shiloh rode close to them in circles several times while the soldiers fired at him. He then returned to where we had paused at the top of the ravine. He exclaimed, "Ah, ah." Someone called out, "Shiloh friend, what is wrong?" He began untying his spotted belt, and as he shook it, bullets fell out. He was deeply sacred, and the soldiers' bullets could not harm him. He was an impressive figure. We lingered there for a while, awaiting any developments as the sound of gunfire echoed all around. Suddenly, I heard someone shout, "They are leaving! They are leaving!" We looked up and saw the cavalry horses bolting in a chaotic stampede. They were all gray. I witnessed Little Bear's horse rear up and charge uphill toward the soldiers. As he got close, his horse was shot down beneath him. He rose, limping because the bullet had passed through his leg, and began making his way back toward us, despite being fired upon by the soldiers. His brother friend, Elk Nation, rode up on his own horse, helped Little Bear onto the back, and brought him safely away while bullets struck the ground all around them. It was his responsibility to go to his brother friend, even though he likely knew it could cost him his life. By this time, a loud war cry echoed around the soldiers as warriors emerged from every direction. The air grew thick with dust and smoke as the sky darkened. We saw the soldiers start running downhill toward us. Nearly all of them were on foot, and it seemed as though their fear had overtaken their senses. They moved their arms as if they were running at full speed, but their legs only managed a slow walk. Some fired their guns aimlessly into the air. We all shouted, "Hoka hey!" and charged at them, surrounding them as the twilight settled over the battlefield. I encountered a soldier still on horseback and loosed an arrow. It pierced him cleanly through, just beneath his ribs, with both ends sticking out. He let out a scream, clutched the saddle horn, and wobbled as his head drooped forward. I rode beside him, grabbed my sturdy bow, and struck him hard across the back of the neck. He toppled from his saddle, and I dismounted, finishing him with blows from my bow. Even after he had died, I struck him a few more times, and with each blow, I exclaimed, "How?" Rage filled me as I thought of the women and children running below, terrified and breathless. These Wasatchews, whites, had come seeking a fight, and we gave them one. I didn't see much more after that. I saw Brings Plenty kill a soldier with his war club. I saw a red-horned buffalo fall. A Lakota warrior was riding along the edge of the ravine, shouting warnings to be cautious because a soldier was hiding there. I watched as he charged in, killed the soldier, and started slashing at him with a knife. Then we began heading toward the river, and as the dust cleared, we could see women and children crossing over to join us from the other side. The soldiers in that area had all been defeated, and their bodies lay scattered around. The women hurried up the hill and began stripping the fallen soldiers. They were shouting, laughing, and singing. I saw something unusual. 2 large elderly women were stripping a soldier who was injured and pretending to be dead. After they had taken his clothes, they began cutting at something on him, and he suddenly jumped up and started struggling with them. He swung one of the women around while the other tried to stab him with her knife. Eventually, another woman rushed in and stabbed him, killing him for good. It was strange and almost amusing to see the naked Wasatchew fighting with the stout women. By this time, we noticed our warriors charging at another group of soldiers who had come from the hill upriver to assist the second group we had defeated. The soldiers retreated, and we pursued them back to their hill, where they had their pack mules. They were harder to harm there, as they had dug in and used saddles and other items for cover. While I was near the river, I saw some soldiers coming down with buckets, unarmed. Some boys hiding in the brush jumped out, throwing mud and rocks at them, chasing them into the water. I suppose the soldiers managed to drink enough because they're still drinking now, only in the afterlife. We killed them in the river. As the sun was setting, I headed back home with many others to eat, leaving some warriors to keep watch on the soldiers still on the hill. I hadn't eaten all day because the fighting had begun just as I was sitting down to my first meal. Iron Hawk's words to Black Elk were heavy with the weight of memory, and as he finished recounting the events, there was a long silence between them. The old friends who had once shared childhood games and dreams now shared the weight of history. Iron Hawk had lived through the fury of battle, and Black Elk had always known that the stories of their people needed to be passed down, not just for remembrance, but for the survival of their spirit. With each word Iron Hawk spoke, Black Elk listened deeply, understanding that these memories would live on in the stories of the Lakota people, carried by the winds and passed from generation to generation. The past had been written in the blood of their warriors, the earth bearing witness to their bravery, and the voices of their ancestors would forever echo in the hearts of those who would listen. In that moment, the 2 childhood friends knew that the story of the Lakota would never be forgotten, not just in the words they shared with each other, but in the very soul of their people. The earth would endure, and the spirit of the warriors would live on through the telling. Now, let me share another part of the story, continuing with a different perspective from an interview in 1907. On May 13, 1907, Eli S. Richter shared his account of the events surrounding the battle with Custer during an interview in Chadron, Nebraska. According to Richter, the Native American tribes who fought against Custer were the Oglalas, Cheyennes, Rosebud or Brule, Minneconjous, Hunkpapas, Santee, a few Arapahoes, and Sans Arcs, also known as Nobos, Itazi Pico, pronounced Itas Picho. These tribes had set up their camps along the Little Bighorn River 2 nights before the battle. The conflict with Custer began on the 3rd morning, starting early, around 8 or 9 o'clock, as determined by the position of the sun, as observed by Iron Hawk. On that fateful day, 2 young men were traveling back on the Indian Trail toward the east in search of ponies when they noticed the soldiers approaching. One of the boys was killed, while the other quickly returned to the camp to warn the people. His return caused great confusion among the camp members. At that time, the Hunkpapas were positioned in the upper camp along the river. Soon after, the soldiers were seen in battle formation, their flags flying high and their staffs planted in the ground, signaling the onset of battle. While the soldiers were hidden from view, the smoke from their gunfire was clearly visible. They were positioned within a patch of timber. According to Richter, Reno's troops never made it into the camp among the teepees, nor did they push past the timber. The soldiers remained in the trees for only a brief period before the fighting escalated. Iron Hawk was actively urging the warriors from the very beginning, rallying them to action and urging them to quickly mount their horses in preparation to protect the camp. The braves gathered on the side of the soldiers near the steep riverbank that forms the western edge of the valley. Soon after, Crazy Horse, having gathered his fighters, charged toward the soldiers in the timber and clashed with them. When the warriors along the bank saw this move and heard the battle cries of Crazy Horse's men, they charged forward with great intensity, shouting fiercely as they swept down on the soldiers' flank. The soldiers scattered, retreating in haste, while the Indians wielded war clubs as their primary weapons, with some using bows and arrows. The majority of the damage was done by knocking the soldiers off their horses as the Indians pressed in close and fought among them. The Hunkpapas were the first to be encountered when Reno launched his attack. Iron Hawk recalls that the Indians were so numerous that Reno's men would have been overwhelmed and would not have lasted long if they had chosen to remain in the woods and stand their ground. The Indians reported that another group of soldiers was moving down the opposite side of the ridge. The warriors quickly rushed across the river to meet them. Sitting Bull was present at one end of the attacking force, while Crazy Horse positioned himself at the other end. He isn't certain about Sitting Bull's involvement, but believes he was part of the fight. He mentions that there were so many Indians that it was difficult to track many details. Around 19 Indians were killed in the skirmish. Several others sustained injuries, though the exact number is unclear to him. The soldiers' bodies were stripped, though they were not mutilated. He believes Sitting Bull was at one end of the attacking group, Crazy Horse at the other, and Iron Hawk positioned himself on the ridge side, between the ridge and the river, during the attack on Custer. The warriors surrounded Custer's forces. He recalls that initially the soldiers fired accurately, but as the battle progressed, their aim deteriorated. They began shooting wildly, firing at the ground, into the air, and indiscriminately in every direction. Around where Custer fell, there were roughly 20 soldiers on horseback and about 30 on foot. The Indians pressed in tightly around them on Custer Hill. One soldier broke through on horseback and managed to escape, though the Indians chased him. Iron Hawk ordered them to let him go so he could tell his tale. The soldier outran them, but after riding for about 3/4 of a mile, he dismounted and shot himself in the forehead. He would have escaped. As Custer retreated toward Custer Hill, the Indians followed, collecting weapons, revolvers, and ammunition dropped by the soldiers. They soon began using these firearms instead of their usual clubs and bows. On Custer Hill, many soldiers panicked and fled toward the river, only to be killed while trying to escape. 2 men on the hill wore buckskin suits, while another soldier wore a similar outfit at the opposite end, likely referring to Calhoun Hill. Iron Hawk was injured during the battle, having been shot through the body. He showed me the wound. The bullet had entered below his ribs, passing through his body and slanting upward, nearly exiting on the other side without fully emerging. He did not go near the battlefield after the clash. He was familiar with Rain in the Face and confirmed that he had been involved in the conflict. He stated that the entire nation participated in the battle, and from this, he seemed to imply that Rain in the Face had been there. Iron Hawk owns a silver medal featuring President Grant's portrait on one side, accompanied by the inscription, United States of America, Liberty, Justice, and Equality. Let us have peace. On the reverse side is an image of the open Holy Bible with a globe displaying the words Atlantic Ocean and Pacific Ocean. Nearby there is a stump, plow, rake, hoe, shovel, and axe, along with the following inscription, On Earth Peace, Goodwill Toward Men, 1871. The medal measures approximately 2.12 inches in diameter and is about 3/16 inch thick. Iron Hawk recounts that the Indians crossed the river at various points to engage Custer. The first group of Indians to encounter Custer numbered around 100. He mentions that Custer never came close to the river, with his closest approach being roughly a mile away, possibly even 3/4 of a mile. He recalls that Keogh and his men were killed near a small ravine. Iron Hawk himself was situated on the field between the ridge and the river. This interview took place on Sunday, May 13th, in the tent of Archie Sword, who is the son of Captain George Sword's brother, located at Chadron. Archie Sword is also Iron Hawk's son-in-law and works as a freight handler at the depot. Iron Hawk's recounting of the Custer battle was conveyed through sign language, which was strikingly vivid. He is a large, robust individual with strong, typical features and a pleasing face, but his serious demeanor transforms into great enthusiasm when discussing topics of interest. Iron Hawk notes that the battle ended when the sun was at its zenith. He described the time by saying that the sun was in the middle of the sky when he looked up. Regarding the beginning of the fighting under Reno, Iron Hawk's gestures suggested that it occurred around 8 or 9 o'clock.